Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I guess the weather is so amazing, but I'm sure you are here to find something fascinating about a camel. My name is Jin Young Jin. I'm the Director of Cultural Programs here at the Charles B. Wangcenter and the organizer of today's special lecture. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you today's lecture entitled The Curious Case of the Camel in Modern Japan, Decolonialism, Orientalism, and Imaging Asia. The camel is an animal that is commonly associated with the Middle East and Africa, but it is also plays a surprisingly significant role in Japanese art and culture. And it may seem to be an unusual subject to explore, especially in the Japanese culture and historical context, but it's the one I'm sure you will find fascinating. So our guest speaker is Dr. Ayelet Zohar. Dr. Zohar is an independent curator, artist, and researcher of Asian art, specializing in Japanese visual culture, photography, and post-colonial theory. She's currently the head of the program in museology and curatorial studies at Tel Aviv University. And she has extensively studied in the subject matter and has published numerous articles and books on it. And I have her newly published book with the same title. I request our library to have a copy so you will have access to it. And currently we're discussing, this is such a great subject to have as an exhibition, so maybe we'll develop an exhibition at the Charles B. Wangcenter in the near future. So with her expertise, we're sure to gain a deeper understanding of this intriguing relationship. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our esteemed speaker to the podium.
Thank you, Jin Young, for the kind introduction. And I think most of you, when you heard the title of this talk, the idea of this book, you were a bit unbelieving. Camels in Japan doesn't sound right? It sounds like something a bit odd or curious or not quite in place. And this is exactly the point of this book. The book looks into an image which is not part of a natural way of looking at animals or circumstances and trying to figure out what is the meaning of relating to an image or an animal which is slightly out of context. So in this case, I probably want to share a very personal point of view. In the early 2000s, I spent a decade outside of Israel, which is my native place, first in the UK for my PhD studies, and then in the US for my postdoc. And by the time I returned to Israel, it was 2010, it was quite clear to me that I would like to bring a unique point of view into the arena of Japanese studies, one that comes from the experience of a researcher who lives outside Japan, but also not quite part of the Anglophone world or the European point of view. So, how the views and similarities between Japan and Israel, two nations that live on the verges of Asia and constantly negotiate their position between Asia and Europe, any comparison of the writings of the Meiji era intellectuals such as Fukuzawa Yukichi or Okakura Kakuzo will dramatically expose how these are similar to the thoughts of preeminent Zionist leaders such as Theodor Herzl or Marx Nordau, but this fascinating discussion is to be left out of our occasion today. So in 2010, upon returning to Israel, I thought of working on images of the Middle East, of Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians in Japanese culture, and an interesting text on the emergence of Japanese filmmakers who was working on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is currently in the making, and I hope to publish it before long. So my research about different aspects concerning the Middle East and Japan was going into different directions, not just the camels. I was looking into other aspects as well. But through my research, I came across fascinating images of all kinds and sorts. And then I realized camels, an animal often associated with the Middle East, is present in the Japanese imagination for centuries, and therefore decided that this was a rich and pregnant subject to delve into and find out more about the depictions of camels by Japanese artists. But what really made my decision to explore more deeply into this subject was my realization upon a visit to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, the big museum which is dedicated to the atomic bomb that was falling over Hiroshima and destroyed the city, as you all know the story, that camels were also an image present in the contemporary culture, as can be seen in the lobby of this museum. So once you enter the museum in Hiroshima, you're ready to hear the whole story about the Manhattan program, the atomic bombs, the remains, the suffering and everything. But what welcomes you is this huge mural on the left with a camel caravan. And when I saw this, I thought, well, I have a subject that I probably need to look more into and understand why there is a caravan of camels just at the entry to the Museum of the Atomic Bomb in Hiroshima. So just before entering the exhibition, and this made me think, what is the reason that made this image the front piece before you actually enter the main exhibition on the atomic bomb? And before going into the images and drawing your attention, I want to state that camels were always an exotic animal in the eyes of the Japanese audience, representing faraway lands. This image is not necessarily an optimistic one, or images that light the desire and positive imagination, like, say, the images of the geisha or the cherry blossom in Western imagination. So many times when we think about Japan, we have this image of a country of beautiful ladies wearing kimonos, or the cherry blossom, which is now on and everybody wants to go and view it. We have very positive imagination. But what happens when the Japanese imagine the Middle East and they put the camel up front? Is this such an optimistic or positive image? So images of camels have many roles over the 1,000 years of presence in Japanese art, and I would like to point to a few. It was a mystical and supernatural unknown creature, as it is depicted in the Shotoku Taishi Eden images. And let me explain for a moment. Shotoku was an important prince in the 6th century in Japan. And he was the person who established the first contacts between Japan and China. And his life is celebrated in Japan in many ways. And there is a scroll with many images that tells the different aspects of his life. And quite in the beginning of the story, there is a mention that Shotoku encountered a camel. Now, it's written like the two characters of camel, Rakuda, or the Chinese characters, Loto, are written in the text. But when I was going through the scroll, I couldn't find anything that looked like a camel. But then I realized that this was the camel that the painter put in relation to these characters. So the word was camel, but the image was this. Do you want to guess why? He never saw a camel. He didn't have a clue about a camel, and it was a mystical animal. And this is how the painter depicted a camel, because This was something from his far imagination, a blue animal with white spots and long nails and, I don't know, unicorn in the middle of his brow. So this is like the very earliest image of a camel that I could find in the Japanese context. To object images of working animals riding camels spread around tourist spots in Japan, such as Oshima Island in the Tokyo Bay. This is a picture from the 1930s, so you can see that between the two, this imaginary creature of blue skin and white spots, and the images of camels becoming lowly animals that were used in tourist venues to carry tourists to top of the mountain, there was a big gap of images that was occurring to the viewer. From magical images that can cure the illness of lost love, like in this story, it's a story called The World of the Camel, and the author of this story, which is very cute, tells about a couple who are fighting all the time, and then comes an advisor, and he tells them, go to the misemono, which is like a circus or a roadside show, and buy some camel urine, and if you drink it, your love life will be restored. So, you know, this kind of attitude was also there. From the magical animals that can cure the illness of lost love to symbolic creatures that represent Japan's hegemony over Asia, like in this painting, where we can see a painting done in 1938 by a famous painter called Liu Xi. And if you recognize, there is a person in the center sitting among the camels, and this person is a very famous figure in Japanese history. His name is Yoshitsune. Yoshitsune was the youngest brother of Yoritomo, who was the first shogun of Japan, and Yoritomo was very jealous of Yoshitsune, and he chased him all over the place. In the end, Yoshitsune committed suicide, seppuku with a sword. But according to the Japanese legend, after he died, he was reborn in Mongolia, and he was actually incarnated in Genghis Khan. And therefore, there is a connection between the ancient Japanese culture and the Mongolian culture. And this painting by Liu Xi in 1938 was meant to represent this kind of link between Japanese history and the Mongolian history. And this is not a naive link. It was during the time that Japan invaded Asia. It conquered Manchuria. It invaded already in 1931, but launched a war against China in 1937. And one of the reasons the Japanese politics tried to put forward is that there was a link and a justification through the image of Yoshitsune and mythological people like him. And therefore, the image of Yoshitsune sitting among the camels was a kind of a justification for Japanese politics of the time to go into this avenue of war and conquest. From military beasts of burden, like we see here in Mongolia, Japanese military used the camels to carry the cannons and to carry their military supply. Japanese military was actually going on for 15 years of war, from 1931 until the surrender of Japan in 1945. And also, as we saw on the mural in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, the Museum of the Atomic Bomb, camels were also assigned the role of peace messengers who go across Asia to bring peace to all sides who want to carry on beyond war. So the question at hand is the measures and the distance. How far and how close Japan was to Asia. So I just showed you a mix of different images from different ages and different places and different contexts, just to give you an idea how far-ranging is the camel image in the Japanese imagination. And also, I think what I will show during my lecture today is that the camel can also indicate how far Japan feels from Asia or how close Japan feels from Asia, which may seem a little bit odd question, because if you know your geography, the basic stuff, the islands of Japan are just adjacent to East Asia. They're not far from Korea, only 150 kilometers between Shimonoseki and Busan, or 300 kilometers away from Shanghai to Kyushu. But nevertheless, despite the fact that Japan geographically is very close to Asia, in modern times it felt itself closer to Europe rather than Asia and wanted to distance itself from the mainland. So in early stages, if we look at the pre-modern time, camels were just imaginary creatures standing for the unknown, mystical, unreachable continent of Asia, and therefore associated with mythological cultural power of China and the culture of the mainland. In the Shotoku Eden, this is the full picture of what I showed you before, there is a reference to the camels at the scroll that refers to age 28, and another one's at the age of 47 in reference to Prince's journeys to China. However, the images refer to depictions of camels as mythological animals, nothing to do with the realistic depiction of them. They look like unicorns or kidding or many other types of monsters created through the mixture of elements taken from various animals joined together to generate a mythological being. Only a scroll from late Edo of the 19th century in Myoseiji, which is in Kyoto, shows a camel that may be recognized as such. So you can see here. This is an animal we can probably recognize as a camel versus those animals we saw before with the blue skin and the white spots. The biwa instrument from the 8th century, which is stored at the shosoin. Shosoin is a big warehouse where the Japanese emperors used to keep all the beautiful presents and artistic objects that they received from China and Korea. They were all stored in the shosoin. That was the biggest treasury of Japan. And this biwa, this laut, which is a classical instrument coming from China and Korea to Japan, carries this beautiful image of a musical troupe sitting on the back of a camel. So there were different understandings of the animal through the years. And here, it's a pure quotation of Chinese sources where camels were often depicted as a vehicle of musician troops. This kind of image, like the camel with the musicians on the back, you will find in so many museums, so many places. It's a very common image in Tang, China, and from the 7th to the 10th century. And the musicians usually represent people coming from Central Asia who are different to the Chinese people, different to the Japanese people. Nevertheless, they were famous for being either merchants or musicians or entertainers, and this kind of image of a camel with a musical troupe is very famous. And what we have on the biwa, the instrument that is treasured in the shosoin, is this image of a musician playing a laut on the back of a camel, something that repeats Chinese sources in Japan. So if we jump to the 16th century, I show you here a nanban byobu. Nanban means the barbarians of the South. This is the name the Japanese gave to Western people, the Portuguese initially, who were the first Europeans to arrive in Japan. So they were barbarians of the South. And the barbarians from the South were bringing with them different exotica and curiosities. They were selling the Japanese, by the way, also the guns. The first guns that arrived in Japan came by the Portuguese, and that was very strongly influencing the political situation in Japan. Nevertheless, they brought with them exotic animals, they brought with them different objects, and they brought Christianity. That was the first time that Japanese encountered Christianity, and a lot of Japanese converted to the new religion. That's a different story, which I'm not going into this today. But the 16th century is really important in this respect of the encounter between Western people and Japan. And as we can see, while bringing different exotic objects and curiosities, camels were also there. This is a screen, a byobu in Japanese, which is made of 6 sections. And you can see on top the Portuguese caravel, which is the big ship that they came with, normally coming from Indonesia, Batavia. That was the station where they are keeping, or from Macau near Hong Kong. And they were coming with different merchandise to Japan, selling their own, buying Japanese silk, Japanese porcelain, Japanese tea, and then selling that back in Portugal. So we can see how this is a Japanese painting depicting the Portuguese. We can see the different people in exotic dress, these big trousers and their gowns, etc. But among them, there is a camel, and it's a double hump camel, which means it's a Bactrian camel from Central Asia, rather than the dromedaries from the West. So interestingly, on this painting of the Portuguese done in Japan, we can see a quotation of a camel. Here's a close-up look at that. And we can see up the Portuguese merchants in their very elegant dresses and how the Japanese depicted them, as well as the person who handles the camel with them. So this is just the pre-Edo. Edo is the time when Japan starts, after the Portuguese, I have to tell you, the Portuguese with Christianity actually came to a conflict with the Japanese. The Japanese didn't like the exclusiveness of Christianity. The Christians wanted them to stop believing in Buddhism or in Shinto, the local practices. And for the Japanese, that was too harsh. So eventually they threw away the Portuguese and banned Christianity altogether. It became a forbidden religion in Japan, and they closed the country. From 1639, nobody was allowed to come to Japan or go out of Japan. Anyone who tried to land on the shores of Japan was killed. So Japan came into a period of enclosure, and the only people who kept in touch with Japan were the Dutch. And they had like a small island near Nagasaki where they could lead their ships to and can have relationship and commercial relationship with Japan, bring different books, different things the Japanese requested, and still buy the porcelain, the silk, and the tea that were the favored products that were sold later on in Europe. So we jump into the Edo period is marked by few more changes in attitude. Through the newly introduced bodies of research and knowledge introduced by the Dutch. So the Dutch brought a lot of knowledge from Europe to Japan. In the 18th century, So Shiseki, a Japanese painter, has drawn an accurate camel despite the fact that most probably he never saw one, by using Johannes Johansson, a Dutch author that published a book called The Collection of Four-Legged Animals. This book was published in 1660 and arrived in Japan most probably in 1700. And So Shiseki could see this book and actually copy his camel from the models that he saw in this book. So without seeing a real camel, he was able to copy the model from a Dutch book and create quite a realistic image of a camel. In 1821, just at the very end of Edo period ended in 1868, so this is about 40 years before that, a pair of two dromedary camels. Dromedary means those camels that live in the Middle East, in Western Asia. A male and a female arrived in Nagasaki. Their landing created a boom of depictions in drawing, in printing, involving the depictions of the camels with Dutch spelling, Camel, European-looking merchants and Indonesian merchants. Books were published, such as this one called Rakudano Sekai. I showed you the story I told you before about the fighting couple comes from this book, the Rakudano Sekai. And the depictions of camels as exotic creatures whose place was in the misemono roadshows. They were now on display. People were buying tickets to come and see the camels in this kind of circus roadshow. And they were allowed to feed them with radish, daikon radishes, and it was a kind of a curiosity, something of much fun. These camels attracted the attention of the famous artist Kuniyasu, and even Hokusai himself, as you can see. Hokusai, who's one of the most famous, the one who has drawn the Great Wave. So he was also attracted to this image of the camel, and we find in some of his, what we call manga. Manga is actually his sketchbooks. Later on, this word was adapted to describe the comics that we all know, but originally the word meant sketchbook, and it was invented by Hokusai himself. So Hokusai's manga carries this wonderful drawing in his book, and the misemono roadshows were set up from Nagasaki in the west to Ryogoku in Edo. Edo is what we call today Tokyo. And you can see the camels on the stage at the top corner, and the crowd is fighting to get in to see the camels that are on the stage in this kind of show. There is another picture of a misemono, this kind of event festive in Sendai, which is up north, and we can see the camels sitting in his cage, and everybody's coming to view him on this kind of roadshow. And also in Nagoya, in central Japan, this is a whole book that describes the events occurring around the special misemono, the roadshow in Nagoya, and you see the crowd is coming. This is a poster announcing the camels coming from a distant land, and the detailed book has the very many stages of buying the ticket and going into the show, and the camels coming into the stage and dancing around. And the person who wrote it, his name is Koriki N. Koan. He's documenting the excitement and special atmosphere in Nagoya during the Camels misemono, and the special models that were created and souvenirs produced on that occasion. So what you see is like it's a model of a camel that was led around town to show the children and those who celebrated the misemono in Nagoya. Japan's entry into the last part of the Bakufu regime, that was after 1854, meaning the Americans, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Shimoda in the bay, Uraga Bay, just south of Tokyo, and he warned the Japanese. He said something like, if you keep on closing your ports and don't let anyone enter, we are going to shoot you. They brought big cannon boats and wanted to bomb the Japanese, and the Japanese were very intimidated by this idea, so they decided to open the country. And eventually, a few years later, after 1855, there was an American settlement in Yokohama, and that also signaled the possibility for other nations like the British and the French and the Dutch and the Russians. They all came to newly open Japan. Everybody was very curious about what was going on, and they had a huge settlement for foreigners in Yokohama. And what you see here is the house of an American merchant, and you can tell the different elements. You can see at the back, they have like a big table with chairs, and everybody's eating cakes and dressed up in Western style. And you have here the lady dressed in Japanese style, and some people who are serving. Of course, in the center is the merchant and his aides. But look, just on the right, we have a Western woman who's playing a violin. Obviously, the painter didn't know how to depict violin playing, but on top of her is a picture of camels. You see that? Why? Why in an American merchant's house in Yokohama you find a camel picture? That's kind of strange, I would say. I don't think it's part of American culture to have camel images at home. So the reason for that, and this is if we look more closely at this picture, I kind of distorted from the original print, you can see that these camels are actually a quotation from what was very popular in Europe during the first half of the 19th century, what we call the Orientalist painting. Painters from France and from England traveled to North Africa, to Egypt, to Morocco, even to Turkey or Palestine, and they drew camels as the signifiers, as the symbol of the Middle East. And these paintings were very popular in Europe at the time, and they kind of symbolized exotica, the spreading colonialism, the rule of Europe over the Middle East and the Arab world. And so because they were so ubiquitous and so popular in Europe, I think the painter of the print we just saw before quoted these images as part of his understanding of curiosities of the European world. So let me see if I just have it here. It could be an indirect answer, but my sense is expressed above as the exotic foreigners were associated with exotic animals. Moreover, the first part of the 19th century was the heyday of Orientalist painting tradition, with practitioners such as Jean-Léon Gérôme in France and Léon Auguste Adolphe Belli in the United Kingdom. And the theme of camel images and camel caravans was extremely popular and appeared in dozens of pictures across Europe at the time as part of the Orientalist exotic view of the Middle East and the Arab world. The Meiji period brought another shift. Meiji period means that, Commodore Matthew Perry came in 1854, and his threat to bomb Japan if they don't open the ports worked. So Japan opened up, and Yokohama was established, and different nations, different people from different countries came about and settled in Yokohama. But then there was a big turmoil and a big conflict within Japan. Part of the government and the people in power wanted to keep the traditional system, to keep the country closed, to kick out the Americans and the foreigners, and to stay with the shogunate, with the military system of Japan. Another part of the Japanese people wanted to modernize. They saw that the West had already a lot of technological advancement, and they wanted to use it or to be able to advance Japan. And they said, we need to open the country, we need to modernize, we need to change everything. And that led into a war between the two factions, between the two parties within Japan. And the war ended by the victory of those who supported modernization. That happened in 1868. As a result, they dismissed the shogun, they dismissed the military system that was the leading system in Japan since the 12th century. So for 700 years, it was under the rule of the samurai, of the military class. And from that moment on, Japan became a constitutional monarchy. They brought the emperor from Kyoto to Edo. They changed the name of Edo to Tokyo, and this was called, from now on, the Meiji period. So this is a huge change in Japan from a country which is part of Asian systems and cultures following the Chinese models and different aspects, from literature to architecture, from food to religion, etc., to a country that wants to distance itself from Asia and become part of Europe. So the shift in Meiji is very interesting because it also entails many questions of how you do that, or what does it mean to become modern, to become part of the modern world? Why is the modern associated with Europe, European culture? Why to dismiss Asia? All these questions became very strong part of what Japan was going through. So now it was not just Japanese imagining Asia through the metonymy of the camel. It was translated and practiced through European views of Asia. So part of what Japan was going through in this period is adopting European views of Asia, not just wanting to become Europeanized itself, but also becoming part of this worldview, or what we know as Orientalism, a perception that reshaped Japanese views of themselves as modern and progressive, and those of Asia as lowly, primitive, outdated, and a place that needs to be re-educated, reshaped by Japanese norms of modernity. After the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894-95, camels were now brought to Japan as trophies, a token for the Japanese success in the war on mainland and the victory in that war, to which again the camel serves as a metonymy of the lowly, defeated China that was confined and brought back as a loot. Moreover, according to modern norms of the era, camels were not on display in the wild entertainment circus like misemono, but were now caged in the zoological garden, a civilized, modern, scientific location where visitors could be watching the animals as part of a greater educational scheme that turned Japan into a civilized, modern state of science, education, and knowledge. The Japanese audience that attended now the Ueno Zoo instead of the Ryogoku Misemono was doing so under a completely different discourse that evacuated the camels from their entertaining role of the past decades and making them objects of research and knowledge under scientific paradigms. A postcard commemorating the royal visit of the royal prince to Kyoto in 1907 is another indication of the prestigious position of the zoo as a modern site versus the humble position of the misemono of the previous generations. Finally, two images of camels painted in Nihonga style by students of the Kyoto Geidai, the Kyoto Art School. These, despite the fact that the students were required to go to the zoo to do the shajitsu, meaning painting from the real, being in the zoo, looking at the camels, drawing them on site, having the practice of drawing from life. The drawing okay, they had to do the drawing in front of the animals. Kamamoto Gizan's image is nearly mythological in the powers he articulated to the animal and its rider in the sandstorm. So the camel is drawn from life in the zoo by sitting in front of it, but later on, in the context of Nihonga and the way he depicted that, the camel became a very mystical animal. And Yokota Gentaro's image is milder and shows the animals as cute, relaxed creatures who look back at the viewer. Another task assigned to the animals at this period was that of beasts of burden. In Izu Oshima, the animals were assigned to carry the tourists arriving by ferries from Tokyo City, carrying them all the way to the top of Mount Mihara. The staff employed as the guides and traders and leaders of the animals were again adorned with exotic clothing of faraway lands, Turkish style this time, just like we saw in the misemono images where the team of entertainers were dressed in Chinese, sometimes Indonesian style. Of course, camels have not disappeared from tourist venues in Japan even today. For example, the Totori Sakyu, sand dunes of Totori, do have them to this day, and people will hire a camel by distance and time to go riding and explore the area. This episode of camels now becoming beasts of burden, employed to carry humans as a tourist attraction, brings us to one of the darkest periods in Japanese modernity, the invasion to Mongolia and Manchuria in 1931, what is known in Japanese as the Manchuk War, and the process which eventually led to the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. This time, the Japanese military made use of local assets, including coal mines, agricultural farms, and eventually taking over the camels to become part of the military system on the steppes. Camels were now tied to carts, cannons, and caravans carrying the supplies of the Japanese military in the wilderness, becoming an integral part of the military. But this is not all. In 1930, Pan-Asianist fantasies was developed in Japan as mythological links between Japan and Mongolia in the name of Greater Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, Dai To A Kyo Eiken, and the links between Japan and mainland, this time under Japanese leadership. Specifically, an odd myth was promoted that Yoshitsune did not commit seppuku, but in fact escaped from Japan to Mongolia, where he became Genghis Khan. This legend was promoted during the war years by Japanese historians Suematsu Kencho and Oyabe Zenichiro, without any criticality or irony. In reality, it cannot be true. Yoshitsune was born in 1159 and died on 15 June 1189, while Genghis Khan was born in 1162 and died in August 1227. Genghis Khan was born before Yoshitsune died, and therefore there is no historical basis for this legend. Nevertheless, it was the reason behind the mysterious title of Kawabata Ryushi's painting and the depiction of Yoshitsune sitting among the camels. Interestingly, there is also a white horse behind them, presumably the horse he rode from Japan, but this tension between horses and camels is also going to be present in one of the next paintings. One last image in relation to Ryushi's painting is the crowd that stands in front of him when the painting was first on public display during the opening of the 10th Seiryusha exhibition in September 1938. And possibly one of the most surprising and unbelievable images is this painting by Fukazawa Shouzo. I discovered the painting by chance when visiting the Yushukan Museum on the grounds of Yasukuni Jinja at the heart of Tokyo. Now, a small explanation. Yasukuni Shrine is a Shinto shrine that was established during the Meiji in 1856 and enshrines the souls of all those people who died on the national wars of Japan. Therefore, it is considered to be a very extremely nationalistic place or nationalistic shrine associated with discourses of nationalism in Japan. The Yushukan is a museum on the grounds of Yasukuni Shrine and hosts inside an exhibition that looks into the national history of Japan, including the military history, the events that took place during the Sino-Japanese wars, the Second World War, etc., etc. It's a very extreme right-wing venue and has very strange mixture of objects that sort of highlight Japanese military life. So a surprising location for a painting depicting 4 camels, but after already acknowledging the camel mural at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, it was difficult to surprise me. Nevertheless, the circumstances of this painting are quite extraordinary. The painting was donated to the Yushukan by the Kitashirakawa family, a branch of the Japanese royal family, in commemoration of their son, Prince Kitashirakawa Nagahisa. The prince was killed when his airplane crashed not far from Dajingmen, the location depicted in this painting, with the Great Wall of China at the background. On the left side of the painting, you can see Prince Kitashirakawa himself, accompanied by 2 officers. One of them is Kanai Shoji, the chief Japanese commander of the area, and the other is apparently Prince Dewang, the leader of the pro-Japanese Inner Mongolia movement. So just to make clear, this is Kitashirakawa himself, this is Dewang, and this is the 3rd Japanese officer. Behind, this is the gate of the Great Wall of China, which you can see running on top of the mountain. You can see a scene here of a Mongolian shepherd with sheep and Japanese officer kind of chasing him. And on this side of the picture, we have 4 camels, 1, 2, 3, and 4 behind. And the Mongolians, Manchurians are sitting among them. And this person here I'm going to talk about, he's a painter. You see he's holding a drawing pad and he's drawing something. It's quite strange. And he's Japanese looking and he's wearing Japanese military uniform. So they are all dressed in neat military uniforms, the guys on the right, in display of power and dignity. On the right-hand side of the painting, we see 4 camels in different shades of brown in kind of disordered manner, Mongolian people sitting on the ground among them, creating an amalgamation between the Mongols and the beasts. However, the most interesting part in the painting is the figure of the painter, who is positioned not on the side of the Japanese military with the power and order, but among the camels. You see, this is a closer look of that. Among the camels and the Mongolians. Fukuzawa created quite a transgressive painting, which is now in the collection of one of the fortresses of right-wing power, the Yasukuni Shrine. But the message of this painting is the opposite of what he was sent for into the Manchukuo. He identifies with the locals, stands against the Japanese colleagues, and assimilating into the odd background. My research had revealed some fascinating history on Fukuzawa's years in Mongolia. Clearly, he was in an effort to create a local artist association and help Mongol painters create their own artistic language and painting style. Fukasawa's heart laid with the locals, and he positioned himself against the military power and Japanese rule of those years, while Prince de Wang seems to be on the opposite. He betrayed his people, he joined the Japanese, and does not belong anymore. Fukasawa, who spent several years in Mongolia, created some fascinating sketchbook with images of camels and people, and he has also a preparation drawing in watercolors that depicts the general structure of the painting to come. Interestingly, the image of Prince Kitashirakawa was taken from the photograph that was at hand, and among other photographs in the prince's album, the presence of horses is always highlighted. Horses were associated with the power of the lords, the samurai, and then the royals, borrowing from the image of British royalty and associating the Japanese high class with them. Another example in this vein is Baron Nishi, who is well known through Clint Eastwood's film Letters of Iwo Jima, where he's introduced as a horse riding champion and was the one who brought his horse to Iwo Jima, part of the prestigious position as a companion to Lord General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who was the high commander of the island. If you want to see this film, it's fascinating, it's really interesting anyway, without the horses specifically. It is easy to see, therefore, that the horse, with its grace and haughtiness, is a good metonymy for the Japanese, while the camel, that now is already treated as a beast of burden, is associated with the Mongols and locals, poor populations of northern China, and stands for the lowliness of the land, the poverty of the people. Its inelegant presence is what the Japanese distant from, and it is a good example to show how, in this period of war and occupation of the northern steppes of northern Asia, camels became associated with the shortage and low life of the locals. This brings me to the final part, the post-war era. Still camels from highly developed, globalized Japan. We started with the murals of Hiroshima, and this is the right moment to unravel the mystery why camels were painted in the Peace Memorial Museum in Hiroshima. So just to go back a minute, this is a series of prints created by Yoshida Hiroshi in the 1930s, depicting camels in Central Asia in print. And when Hirayama Ikuo created his large paintings of camel caravans, Yoshida Hiroshi's work was of inspiration to him. So this is probably what leads us into the question of why we have the images of camels in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. The post-war era, which was supposed to bring a new peaceful and equal views of Asia, turned to be not that different from the pre-war images of distance and imagination. The central figure here is Hirayama Ikuo, who was born 1930 and died in 2009, one of Japan's most famous, strongest leading figure in the Nihonga school of painting, who passed away in 2009. From 1960 onwards, Hirayama's main theme was the depiction of camel caravans on the Silk Road. Hirayama once told that after the Olympic Games in Rome in 1960, he heard about the transferring of the Olympic fire to Tokyo for the 1964 Games, and that struck his imagination about the land passage from Europe to Japan through the ancient Silk Road. Hirayama stated took some extensive journeys to different points on the Silk Road and connected the story to the passage of Buddhism from Asia to Japan from the Nara period or even before onwards. Hirayama's image, and this is now a front image of the mural in Hiroshima, Hirayama images present an idealized, flawless, exoticized area of Central Asia with the fictional camel caravans as the protagonist of his imaginary Buddhist world. However, in my mind, these are not very far from the idealized mythological images of pre-war era, like that of Ryushi that we saw before, presenting Central and Northern Asia as part of the Japanese history and heritage, appropriating the places and animals as exotic objects in the Japanese imagination, ignoring the actual history, specificity, and complexity of local circumstances in places like Afghanistan, India, and Arabia. Hirayama's camel caravans had a precedent. Yoshida Hiroshi, one of Japan's leading woodblock printers in the early 20th century, depicted such caravans in his woodblock prints of the 1920s and 30s. Coming back to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, the reason to choose this theme of camel caravan for the main lobby of the museum and its international conference center, the image of night caravan, related to Hirayama's personal history as being a hibakusha, meaning a person who suffered from the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. He was born in that area and lived there through the war, and therefore he's considered to be hibakusha, somebody who was injured by the atomic bomb, although not in a direct manner. Since he lived in Onomichi in the Hiroshima prefecture during the time of the atomic bomb, and his views of the camel caravans as a metaphor for Buddhism and the peaceful attitude of Japan towards Asia in the post-war years. One last point concerning Hirayama's work. During a studio visit to his family home in Kamakura, I had the honor to look through his sketchbooks and examine the many drawings he prepared during the long journey to Central Asia. But to my surprise, I could not find any drawing of live camels or camel caravan, only those of statues and figurines or sketches done from photos. There was only one picture in Hirayama's wife Michiko's journal with photographs of camel hordes taken in India, but no live sketches at all. Therefore, it is reasonable to understand that Hirayama's paintings are compositions based on photographs, compositions of his imagination, drawing an idealized world of the Silk Road, where camel caravans were long ago replaced by lorries and flights. Finally, the last series, indeed not the least one, is one of Japan's leading photographers, Noguchi Rika, who created a series of camel images during a residency at the Sharjah Art Biennale in 2007. Noguchi spent several weeks in the Emirate, taking short trips into the desert where she took the images of camels and their caregivers. According to Minami Yosuke, the curator of her exhibition in Tokyo, despite the romantic images of Arab princes riding in the vast desert expansion, the reality is that the lovely guys in the pictures are guest workers, mostly from Pakistan, hired by the rich camel owners in Sharjah to look after their animals in their special sheds in the desert. Therefore, again, despite the exotic, somewhat romanticized and idealized images of the camels, only 15 years ago, the camel stands as an exotic creature which actually obscures the tough realities of global exchanges of hard work behind it. This brings our journey to an end. To conclude, I would like to point out to some leitmotifs that accompany the course of my book, from the early images of the camels in Shotoku Taichi Eden to the present. Camels are presented as others. They stand for faraway and unknown lands. They are exotic and unfamiliar, and therefore stand for otherness. Since dromedary camels are associated with the western regions of Asia, and the Bactrian camels are part of the Central Asian culture, both types served as a metonymy for Asia, place that in modern years Japan has put itself against, distancing itself from the images of the continent. My analysis of the camel images offers a new paradigm which suggests to inverse this gaze, to view Japan through the distance and quality attributed to the other. This is being manifested through the image of the camel as an epitome of what Japan is not, and how there is a desire to distance itself from what is perceived as Asian, underdeveloped, strange, abject, lowly, unsophisticated, and unintelligent other. I think this is the end. Thank you very much. So a few more images. This is all from Noguchi series in Sharjah.
Q&A. If you have any question, raise your hand. I'm going to pass around the microphone.
The camels look exotic in Japan. Do you think things would have been different if camels naturally lived in Japan or caught on more in Japan like horses?
Well, it's an if question in the sense that because they are distant animals, the other animal that was depicted a lot in Japanese manuscripts is the elephant, for example, or peacocks, and animals that were considered exotic. So the fact that an animal doesn't live in a place makes it different and very unusual. Giraffes were also animals that were depicted in exotic manner. But while elephants actually came to Japan early on, much before camels did, as you understood. Camels came only in the 19th century in real life. But the fact that camels were ubiquitous in Asia, they were animals associated with Asian life, whether in the Western Asia with the dromedaries that are part of the daily life, as well as Central Asia. They were associated with the caravans, with the passage between Asia and Europe. So they had a certain cultural meaning within Asia itself, while they were missing in Japan. So it's not just, exotic per se. It's exotic in Japan, but has a certain meaning in China or in Central Asia that made them as a metonymy for Asia. This is why I say that associating camels with Asia and horses with Japan as a general paradigm was part of this kind of modernist thinking of distancing or layering or putting cultures in a certain categorization or ideas of high and low, etc. So it was associated with that because of the specific context in which camels lived and were part of the culture they belonged to.
Thank you for your talk. I am surprised that range of the sources you collected. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So I just wondered that this camel image in Japanese art or resource, I never thought of that. So I just wonder how you started to collect these images with camels. It's a very broad question.
As I mentioned, it was the encounter with camels in really unexpected places, like the Hiroshima Museum, the Yushukan, places that seemed a little bit out of place, out of context. Why camels here? Why camels in this context? That was probably one of the moments that I realized that there was something going on beyond my understanding at that point. This was one of the reasons. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, because camels are associated with Western Asia, with the Middle East, and I wanted to look into connections or ideas of the Middle East in the Japanese imagination and mind. So the two parts just made me think, how camels were depicted and what is the association of camel. And then when I started collecting these images, I realized there was a very large collection of possibilities that led to different directions, from Shotoku Eiden, which is very mystical, to the images of the postcards from Izu Oshima, where the camels were just beasts of burden. People used them for carrying different things. So I realized there was a huge range of possibilities in relation to camels, and that made me think, how can I order that or think about it, and what does it mean to think about the camel? And a lot of people in Japan, they were very surprised by this idea to look into the camel, because obviously camel is not part of Japanese culture. It's not something, of course, there are some songs, there are some references, but it's always about something distant. It's about the desert, distant lands, Arabia, it's like, it's always about something very far. It's not part of culture. So in a way, looking at something which is not part of the culture, which is something which is completely, in a way I could say, opposite of the culture, makes you understand something about the culture. It's in an inverse way, in an unusual way. It's not about talking about what is part of the culture, it's talking about something which is completely different to the culture. And then the way people try to distance themselves from that object, or they try to describe it in exotic or distancing manner, tells you something about what they think about themselves and why they want to distance themselves from that object, why it is not positive in their kind of association. I think it tells a lot about our unconscious mind, our unconscious attitude to things, not just what we like to say, but what we don't like to say, or we don't like to present as our priority. So it was an interesting project for me in this sense, to kind of discover an unconscious mode of thinking that is not so easily evident in Japan. As you probably know, people don't tell you what they don't like, they always tell you what they like. So that was a means, a way to go sort of behind the scenes and learn something which is not obvious at the first sight.
Since everyone has a classes, I'll take one more question.
Thank you very much. You showed us a lot of images, paintings, mural walls, and photographs and so on. But did you come across 3D objects?
The only object I can say 3D was the pipa, the biwa, the lauta, which has the decoration.
Yes, but even then it is, it's a two-dimensional image. Because why I'm asking, a colleague of mine, I hope he's going to do so. He found a tea set, a teapot in the shape of a camel, and on top there is this oriental woman or person sitting. So this would suit to all what you just presented, but I just wonder whether you came across an object like that.
So I mentioned the book about the misemono in Nagoya, the camel misemono in Nagoya. Is a book from 1826. And it's very long. I think it's about 35 pages, which is a lot for a handwritten book and hand-painted. The last part of it is like after you saw the misemono, after you saw the camels, you gave them daikon radish, etc., etc. There was a whole section of souvenirs, omiyage, you know, it's like, and there are depictions of these different objects. So there was like a display of camels made of feathers, but it's a drawing of this display. There was souvenir objects made of clay. Actually, I found some references from a place south of Kyoto, between Kyoto and Nara, that they had these clay objects. And there was comb made of wood, which had the shape of the double hamp on top. That was also one of the souvenirs they had. So in that book, the last section kind of details. Oh, there was this model I showed on the wheels that they took. It was like a blowing, it was like a balloon image that was made of fabric, and the wind will blow in and you have like a blown camel. And there was kite with camel image on it. So there is a long list of souvenirs, three-dimensional, which is mentioned at the back of this book on the misemono in Nagoya. I can give you the reference if you need to.
Thank you for everyone for tuning in to this very fascinating topic. And if you have any further questions, you can reach out to the wangcenter to relay your further questions. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you.